Hello, I'm Ayo Akinwolere, and welcome to the Athletic FC podcast. As Liverpool host Xabi Alonso, who was the early favourite to replace Jurgen Klopp, how different might life have looked for both Liverpool and Leverkusen? I'm joined by our Liverpool writer for the Athletic, James Pearce, and our German football correspondent, Seb Stafford-Bloor, as well. James, let's start with you. Decent start so far for Arne Slot, but let's talk about Xabi Alonso, because Bayern Leverkusen travel to Anfield tonight in the Champions League. There was conversations, and I don't know how much of this was rumor or how much of this was facts that he was top to replace Jurgen Klopp in the dugout. What is the truth behind this?
Yeah, well, the truth is that he was never part of the process by the time that Liverpool were drawing up a list of serious contenders. I think clearly he would have been in contention for it if he had wanted to be considered, but that wasn't the case. And if you go back to January when Jurgen Klopp dropped that bombshell that he'd be going at the end of the season, I think most people looked around and thought, well, it has to be Alonso because he's doing such an unbelievable job at Leverkusen. Also, that bond with Liverpool, absolutely adored going back to his 5 year stint during his playing days at Anfield, 2004 to 2009. So it just felt like he was the obvious choice. But then of course, then as time dragged on and the story started to emerge that actually he was very happy where he was, and he felt as if it was a long-term project that he was part of at Leverkusen. And then when he came out in March and publicly confirmed that was the case, but at that point, that was no surprise to Liverpool. Richard Hughes, Liverpool sporting director, got a good relationship with Alonso's agent, Inaki Ibanez. He also represents Iriola, of course. Hughes had appointed as Bournemouth manager. So their dialogue, which had started back in late January, February, Liverpool were always under the impression that Alonso wouldn't be available, and that just confirmed it in March. So once that process was stepped up, Alonso was never a part of it. So there were never any face-to-face discussions. He certainly was never offered the job, and of course, Liverpool's data-led search ultimately led them to Arne Slot. He was the only person who was ever offered the job, and certainly the way things have worked out so far, Liverpool don't have any regrets.
Yeah, I mean, there was a reason why Xabi Alonso stayed at Leverkusen, Seb. That record-breaking season, unbeaten in the Bundesliga, incredible, incredible from Xabi Alonso and his team. But this season in particular, I mean, what, fourth in the Bundesliga, 7 points behind Bayern Munich. But also, I think what's been stark from last season compared to this season, for where I'm sitting anyway, last season, extraordinarily, this team only conceded 24 goals. This season, they've already shipped 15 goals in the Bundesliga. What seems to be going wrong?
Fundamentally, I think they've been a little bit unlucky. So if you dig into the data there, you'll find that XG for their opponents is just above 10. So it
Mm,
is quite significant how much they are overperforming. But I think there's some other factors there. I think the intensity with which Leverkusen are playing in the Bundesliga is a little bit off, just by a couple of percent. And that's shown in a little less rigidity in the way they've defended.
mm,
I also think that it's quite interesting because a couple of years ago, you would have, if you were looking for reasons why Leverkusen couldn't perform to the level they did last season, one of them would have been Lucas Radetzky, the goalkeeper and captain. People have said, you can't win a title with him. He's never going to be man or Neuer. He's never going to make enough saves. And I think last season he was outstanding. I think this season he's dropped off a little bit, potentially. I think Leverkusen perhaps are suffering from a few intangibles as well. So naturally, having won the Bundesliga and the Pokal last season, their focus has drifted really more to the Champions League. That's the proving ground
mm.
for them now. There's nothing for them to, whilst winning the Bundesliga again and retaining their title is an objective. It doesn't carry the same cachet that it did. I also think, over the summer, one of the big sagas over here in Germany was whether Jonathan Tah was going to move to Bayern Munich. Tah had a
Mm.
release clause. Bayern Munich didn't quite have the resources to match it. It dragged throughout the summer. It became a little bit acrimonious between the two clubs. Tah hasn't quite looked the player he was last season. And I just think a lot of these tiny details have added up to what looks like a little bit of a crisis. I would edge away from that. I think, the standard is not quite the same. However, last season, they're also the other end of the pitch. They were able to find the goals they needed to get themselves out of holes. There were periods during a lot of games last season when they did not play well, but they were able to turn the power on. And I think last Friday they drew 0-0 at home with Stuttgart, and Stuttgart are a very talented team who have kind of developed this ability to get under Leverkusen's skin. They rattled them a little bit, but also Leverkusen ran into a really excellent goalkeeping performance from Alex Nubel, and it just characterizes their season a bit. It's not Nothing has really changed. They haven't lost any players. They're not really suffering any critical injuries. There's no technical change in the way they're playing. It's just not quite the same, but they are still a very, very dangerous opponent.
In terms of personality, I see certain similarities, both relatively understated, to be honest with you. But also in terms of style of football, do they differ?
It's really interesting because I left England. I don't get to see Liverpool very often in person, but
Mm,
I was able to. I was at the Leipzig game with James, and that was the first time I'd seen them under Slot. And it was the level of intricacy in their football was interesting, and there was a bit more patience. I don't know if this was typical of the season so far, or
mm,
what Slot hopes to build, but it really struck me that yeah, there was the best word is intricacy to the way they play, and there's a lot of originality to the way they created chances. It didn't seem very formulaic as an approach, and I think if on that basis, yeah, there are some similarities because I think one of the great problems posed by Leverkusen, Alonso's Leverkusen, is that you never know where the opportunity is going to come from. Like whether it's those two wing backs who get moved all the way around the pitch. Jeremy Frimpong played as a number
mm.
10 over the weekend, and not in the sort of the fluid during the game sense. He started in the position. Um, and Grimaldo obviously can go outside a fullback, go inside. Florian Wirtz drifts all over the pitch. Victor Boniface is a really, really broadly talented, gifted forward who can do all sorts of things to hurt you. And so as a result, they don't have one method of chance creation the way that, for instance, you talk about Postecoglou Spurs, depending on cutbacks, for instance, or that kind of
Mm.
thing. I don't get that sense from Liverpool, and so that's a familiarity. I don't know if that's fair, but that's just on the observation of one game with Liverpool.
Yeah. James, you wrote a piece, and you were talking about, how Slot already tasted glory at Old Trafford, the San Siro. Look at the Arsenal game coming from behind and getting a draw out of that, beating Chelsea at home as well. Did you expect him to start off so steady? And dare I say it, did you expect such resilience from Liverpool so early under his tenure?
No, no, no. No, I'd be lying if I said I expected to have seen them. What is it? 13 wins out of 15, and one of the two they failed to win was at the Emirates, which was a really impressive point. It's been remarkable. I think, especially in the context of losing such an iconic figure as Jurgen Klopp, because
Mm,
it was almost like common sense told you there has to be a big void. There has to be a drop off because Slot was this, all-encompassing figure that it just felt that he was the kind of the one that galvanized everything. And then, of course, when you lose that, and I think also when there's so much change at the same time, because it wasn't just Klopp going, it was his entire backroom staff. It was pretty much the entire football operations structure behind the scenes. You thought, well, it's going to need a bedding in period. And then you throw into the mix that Slot didn't really get a proper pre-season with the players because pretty much all of his big hitters only came back less than a fortnight before the start of the Premier League season
mm,
because of the Euros and the Copa America. I think nobody had any right to think it would go as well as it has done so far. But he's an impressive guy. You used the word understated before, and I think that's a good one to use about him because he doesn't. If anyone is getting carried away with Liverpool's start to the season, it's certainly not Arne Slot. He keeps on banging the drum about how much there is still to improve, refusing to look any further ahead than the week he's got coming up. The players love playing for him. He's very clear and concise with the way he gets his messages across. The training is interesting and he keeps things fresh and it's dynamic and people have really bought into his ideas. And and it's just working at the minute, and I think it's testament to the environment he's created in a very short period of time that we keep on seeing players come from the fringes and step up and deliver. Joe Gomez was the perfect example of that on Saturday against Brighton. Someone who looked like he might even have left the club in the summer, didn't even make the bench at Ipswich, and he was absolutely outstanding as Liverpool came from behind to win that game. And and he keeps on getting his substitution spot on again. Was really bold, went for it with bringing on Jones and Diaz. Suddenly, a 1-0 deficit became 2-1 up, and then what does he do? He takes off Nunes, brings on Wataru Endo, and says, that'll do us. We'll just hold on for that 2-1 win. Where I think previously, the Klopp way would have been right. We go for the jugular and we try and get 3 or 4. But it's so there is some distinct changes there. But yeah, there's some serious momentum behind Liverpool at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, James, you can't hide your optimism, can you? I can just see you. It's coming, the energy. You're feeling it, and I love it. I love it. It's really good to see. But we'll talk about Liverpool's title challenge in just a sec. But let's go back to Leverkusen, Seb. We talk about where they are in the Bundesliga at this moment in time. And, in fairness, I don't think Bayern, even though they're top of the Bundesliga, fully hit their stride at this moment in time. Do you see enough space and time for Leverkusen to turn their fortunes?
Yeah, I definitely do. I don't think they'll catch Bayern. I think the two clubs are working with different agendas this season. Company is not expected to challenge in the Champions League. It's kind of hoped that Alonso will, and I'm sure not least by him himself and his players. I think it's a question of priority. So yeah, some of the sort of the data anomalies that we've talked of, I expect they'll even themselves out, and by the end of the season, you'll see a Leverkusen who come close to challenging Bayern. But I think, given where they are in the Bundesliga, given that they won it last year, given that they've kind of dispelled that Leverkusen myth around themselves, I can't see that side of it changing. But then I think that's how teams evolve, isn't it? I think, doesn't matter whether it's in the Bundesliga or the Premier League. Anytime you see a team step up in weight class, for want of a better expression, and take on Champions League responsibilities, this kind of feels like, it's not hugely dissimilar to what Aston Villa are suffering through at the moment, really. They're playing in the Champions League, playing to a really high standard in the Champions League, but, suffering the odd bad result in the Premier League. And I think that's what Leverkusen are. And I think it goes beyond Alonso, because I think, from his personal reputation as a coach, I think it matters how he does in Europe this season more than in the Bundesliga. But I think that's also true for a lot of the individual players there, because we've learned what they are in the context of German football. But for instance, like, how good is Jerry Frimpong? How good is Tar? How good is Edmund Tapsoba? Boniface is another one. Florian Wirtz. It's like a lot of the conversation around these players, and it's by design, because Leverkusen is still a development club. They are still a recruit of young players who they wish to sell for profit further down the line. I think that's kind of, you put them in more of a proving ground context. And I think that's ultimately what's going to show.
Okay. James, Seb talks about European football. Xabi Alonso comes to Anfield with Leverkusen. What kind of reception do you think he'll receive? You've got a club legend here, a guy that was, I guess, there were rumours around him taking over Jurgen Klopp. I mean, Liverpool still have a game to win. This is still a Champions League match with a manager that's doing very well for them at this moment in time.
Yeah. I mean, the dynamic would have been different, wouldn't there? If, say, there's a world where Arne Slot had really struggled over the first 15 games, and then, Alonso pops up on the touchline, there'd have been a few wistful looks of if only, but that's simply not the case. And I think it probably makes for an easier night for Xabi Alonso as well in many ways, because Liverpool fans wouldn't swap Arne Slot for anyone. But their respect and love for Alonso is absolutely undimmed. And I think there's a few different layers really to that kind of legendary status that he achieved at Liverpool. I think part of it is undoubtedly just his breathtaking talent with a ball at his feet. I did a piece on the Athletic today talking to a lot of his teammates, and And they basically said, they knew within 20 minutes of his first training session, it was like, wow, we have got something special on our hands here. Just the touch, the vision, the ability to pick a pass, and also the fact that he could hack it. The physical side of things coming from Sociedad, that never held any fears for him. But it went deeper than that. He really embraced everything about not just representing Liverpool, but the city as well. Where a lot of
Yeah.
players, live out in the suburbs behind, big gates and fences. He was in an apartment in the heart of the Albert Dock, right in the middle of the
Mm.
city. He was frequently spotted in, bars and restaurants and parks and the cinema and everything. He wanted to absorb everything that came, with living in Liverpool with his girlfriend at the time, now his wife. His first son was born in Liverpool. And you could see how much it meant to him every time he pulled on the shirt. And I think also with some players, when they leave, it can damage that legacy.
Mm.
You think of people like Fernando Torres and someone like Michael Owen, but that was never the case with Alonso because of the way that things panned out. Because of course, he leaves in 2009 to go to Real Madrid. For a start, it's Real Madrid.
Mm.
I think at that time they just brought in Ronaldo, Benzema, Kaká. You could hardly blame him. And also the other big thing was that Rafa Benitez had tried to sell him a year earlier when he wanted to
Mm.
bring in Gareth Barry from Aston
Gareth
Villa. So I
Barry.
think
Yeah.
there are a lot of fans. You just couldn't hold it against Alonso. And also, if you needed another reason as well, Liverpool off the pitch was in an increasingly big mess under Hicks and Gillette and needed the
Mm.
money. And of course, they got 30 odd million for a player they bought for 10 million 5 years earlier. So and all the way through that period with the Gareth Barry thing, he, Alonso carried himself with remarkable dignity, never once said a bad word about anyone, and then came back and enjoyed the best season of his Liverpool career in 08-09 when Liverpool came very close to winning the title, just missing out to United. So yeah, he'll get a thunderous ovation at Anfield, and it will be richly deserved.
Yeah, clearly a very talented player and a very talented manager as well, Seb. I can't help but think about, what Ruben Amorim sort of alluded to this week, actually, in regards to taking the Manchester United job, saying, it's just an offer he couldn't refuse. Who knows if Manchester United will come calling again. Do you think Liverpool will ever come calling again for Xabi Alonso? Do you think that those ties are severed for a future managerial position?
I think it's more about what Arne Slot's doing. I just
Mm.
don't, because you need the vacancy. I'm sure it's something that will come up again. He's still a very young guy. He's got a lot of years left in coaching if he wants them. I don't think Liverpool's going to be a topic in the immediate future. I've always suspected that he'll end up at Real Madrid. I think that's really the club of one of the clubs of his heart.
Mm.
And I think Alonso was also a really good example of someone who recognizes the quality of the situation that he's in. So a big part of the success, even though it's not spoken about quite as much, is he walked into a situation with no senior coaching experience where he was working under an extremely talented sports director, Simon Rolfs. Fernando Caro, the CEO above Rolfs, is very capable in a lot of commercial ways, a bit outspoken, likes to speak his mind a bit too much, maybe. But Rolfs walked in, Alonso walked into to a solid structure, which is interesting. You draw the Man United parallel because you'd say that, well, a lot of coaches have found out the hard way that you
Mm.
can't just go to a club and
Yeah.
change its direction. It's like trying to get an oil tanker to turn 180 degrees. It's beyond most people. And so I think he's certainly measured enough in his approach, and I think Liverpool would have been a good fit had that been possible. I don't think Bayern will happen now. So I imagine Real Madrid in his future, but then a couple of years down the line, who knows? I mean, it's almost like we're into a new era where we don't really know what a reasonable period in time, what a reasonable period in charge of a team actually is anymore, because it's not the Wenger Ferguson model, is it? That's long
Mm.
gone. So is it 3 years? Is it 5 years? Like, is the intensity of having to lead one of these teams at the very top of the game, can someone withstand it for 3 years? Can they reasonably be expected to perform at the highest level for 5? Like, it exhausted Klopp. Just needed a quick energy drink to recover, though, didn't he? And so where will they be in 5 years? I don't know. But it's James has spoken really eloquently about the affection the club still has for him, and vice versa. So you'd imagine it would come up again at some point.
All right, let's talk about Liverpool's title challenge. We're only 10 games in, James, but 8 wins, 1 draw, 1 defeat. We won't talk about that defeat. Kind of weird defeat, actually, but inevitably Liverpool move on. Can we say for certain, and I read your piece, that Liverpool are genuinely title contenders this season?
Uh, I think it's probably too soon to say that with certainty that they're genuine title contenders. I think what we do know is that an opportunity has opened up that probably no one at Liverpool or any of their fans really expected because with Slot coming in, I think expectations pre-season were, absolute priority, top four, keep Liverpool in the Champions League, and hopefully, have a decent run in the cups, potentially pick up one of the domestic trophies, and that would be a great platform to build on. But suddenly, when you look at the start they've had, and the fact that you feel as if there's a lot more to come performance-wise. And probably even more so when you look around at their rivals. And because become so used to in recent years, and Liverpool have been hurt by this, obviously, in the Klopp era, in terms of needing almost like 100 points to win the league. I mean, Liverpool, what did they get? 96 or 97? I think 93 was it? I think another, and didn't win the league. Yet it doesn't feel like it's going to be that kind of season this season. You look at Arsenal's problems, you look at City, with the absence, Rodri's absence was always going to hurt them. So I think it just feels like opportunity knocks for Liverpool in a way that probably nobody expected. It's just what we don't know yet is whether they are capable of putting together the kind of run that's going to be required to take full advantage of that. I mean, it's a huge few weeks coming up either side of the international break when, of course, Aston Villa come to Anfield on Saturday night, and then straight after the break, you've got Southampton away, and then Real Madrid, and then Manchester City. So, I think after Manchester City have come to Anfield on December the 1st, will probably be a bit clearer, I think, in terms of what is realistic this season. But yeah, there's no question about how good the platform is for them to build on. And I think it probably, there was a lot of talk in the summer about Liverpool not doing business in the transfer market, and people were baffled by it, and they end up only bringing in Chiesa, who's barely kicked a ball for Liverpool so far. But of course, the benefit of that is that although everything's new off the pitch with the manager and his staff, it's everything is very constant, and there's been that continuity in terms of the playing stuff. Slot hasn't had to bed in new players really. It's just been his ideas that he's trying to get into the players. So and I think that's helped so far. And of course this group as well were involved in a title challenge last season before things unraveled in the spring. And it did feel like then for these players, a lot of them hadn't been in that position before. So they will certainly be better for that, for having been through that in the spring and learned lessons. Because of course, at the minute it feels like Liverpool aren't under any pressure because they're not expected to be title contenders. Yet we know full well that if they're still up there come February, then the dynamic shifts because then there will be pressure.
Let's talk about Mo Salah, but also, I mean, look, 3 hurdles coming up immediately for Slot are, the contract situations between him, Trent Alexander-Arnold, and obviously Virgil van Dijk as well. But after scoring the winning goal against Brighton on Saturday, Salah took to Instagram and said, "Thank you for your support last night. No matter what happens, I will never forget what scoring at Anfield feels like." Look, James, I'm not the only one probably reading a bit too much into that, but no matter what happens, and I will never forget what scoring at Anfield feels like. Surely that's a bit of a muted goodbye, no?
I think you could interpret it in a number of different ways. For me, I read it more as just another little nudge towards Liverpool in terms of maybe exerting a little bit of pressure in the negotiating process. He came out, didn't he, after the win at Old Trafford earlier on this season and said, my last season, I think, and then he kind
Yeah.
of he kind of backtracked a bit and said, well, as things stand, it's my last season. So yeah, I think he was just probably making the point that, I thought it was off the back of a piece of absolute Salah genius, wasn't it, to win the game against Brighton. So yeah,
Mm.
I must admit I didn't read it as a goodbye. I read it more as a kind of, do you really want this to be the swan song? Because I
Mm.
get the impression that Salah wants to stick around, but of course it's got to be the kind of deal that he feels that adequately kind of rewards his value and enduring importance to the club.
Yeah, I mean, how difficult is this? I mean, it's probably not Arne Slot's to answer, really, just the contract situation facing Liverpool. And we've talked about it in previous podcasts, but even on the Salah one in particular, in terms of age profile, in terms of future investments, I mean, it's such a strange gamble, isn't it? Because you've got a player that still looks very, very good on the pitch, still delivering great numbers, but you're saying actually that no matter what that contract looks like, that could potentially be money you could invest in newer, younger players.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's the really kind of complex thing in this process because I see lots of fans, especially on social media, say, "Well, just give him what he wants," and of
Mm,
course, the process just doesn't work like that. And we know that Fenway Sports Group, Liverpool's owners, are wary of overcommitting funds to players in the twilight of their career, and of course, Salah will turn 33 next June, so it's the way that Liverpool go about things, and certainly the way that Michael Edwards, how he did things previously, and how I'm sure is the process again now with him at the helm as FSG CEO of football, is almost you have to take that emotion out of it. And
mm,
despite everything that Salah has achieved up to this point, if he wants, for argument's sake, and we're not privy to the length that he would want. I mean, nobody. I don't. I can't see a situation where he would sign, say, a 12-month extension. I'm sure he
sure.
would want 2 or 3 years. So say it was a 3-year deal. That would take him up to his 36th birthday, essentially. Now, he's doing it now, but the Liverpool still believe he'll be as influential when he's 35 or 36. And if he's not, does that present a problem to you if you've committed, say £400,000 a week to keeping him over that period? So yeah, there's a lot to discuss. I'm sure, the other thing that FSG like to do when players are into their 30s like that is heavily incentivized contracts, lower
Mm,
guaranteed basics, higher bonuses based on achievement. But of course, is that something that Salah wants to sign up for, or does he think, well, look at what I've done, it shouldn't be like that. So I'm not surprised that we still haven't got that clarity because
mm.
it was a really difficult issue that Richard Hughes inherited when he took over this summer as sporting director. But yeah, I would expect the situation to become a hell of a lot clearer in the next 6 to 8 weeks because I think once you get to January and someone like Salah could potentially sign a pre-contract agreement,
Mm.
I think recent history tells you that players very rarely sign extensions once they're inside that last 4 or 5 months.
After the 2-1 comeback against Brighton on the weekend, you wrote, that Slot truly felt the power of Anfield. And it's so interesting. I like to sometimes read the comments underneath some of the articles, and a few Liverpool fans were saying, you know what, that's the best it's felt this season. It hasn't really felt like the cauldron at all this season so far. How important are Anfield going to play in what looks like a decent season so far for Liverpool?
Yeah, it's going to be huge because it was interesting as well because it has been a big talking point in the early months of the season. The fact that the atmosphere can be flat. I think the thing is because it gets talked about so much in Anfield as this kind of cauldron in world football. Sometimes it is overblown in terms of the idea that it's like that every week. It's not like that every week. And in fact, if you speak to people that have been going since the 60s or the 70s, they'll tell you it was never like that every week.
Mm-hmm.
But what tends to happen is when they're really needed, it goes to the next level. And it just felt like Saturday was one of those days because, of course, the fans would have been in the pubs around Anfield watching Arsenal get beat at lunchtime. Then you're getting updates on your phone that Bournemouth are beating Manchester City. Yet Liverpool served up, one of the most appalling first halves of football I've seen from them for many a year against Brighton. Very lucky to only be 1-0 down. But it was almost like at half time, everyone in that ground decided, no, this is not the day to do this. You can't waste this chance and fail to take advantage of others dropping off. And it was crazy, absolutely crazy second half. It helped the fact that Liverpool flew into a few challenges and there was a bit of bite to it. That always gets everyone going. But it was, the Brighton manager said himself, they couldn't handle it. They just couldn't handle the noise, and it was one of those days where when Liverpool got one, it just felt almost inevitable that they would get another one soon after. And yeah, Slot said himself it was the best he's experienced. And yeah, especially when you look at some of those home games they've got coming up, not least the City one, they can play a massive part.
Yeah, Seb, yesterday we were talking about the pressure that potentially a team like Manchester City face going into any Premier League campaign. They're gunning for their fifth straight Premier League title, which is unheard of. And then you've got this other narrative of Arsenal looking to win it or try to beat City, and you almost feel like that team has absorbed a lot of that pressure. Whereas Liverpool, actually, it was a semi-free for all, almost like a who knows what would happen this season. Do you think that will really affect how this season pans out for those three in particular and Liverpool in general? Just that, you know what? Everything feels like a dream moving forward because not much was expected this season for them.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think one of the keys there is the way those other teams are talked about. Arsenal have absorbed a lot of injuries this season, but also have had to cope with a lot of expectation. It feels like Arsenal have been in their kind of title winning window for a couple of years now. And this season is probably the first time since they began their rise towards the top of the league where it's felt like a little bit of a flattening out, where there isn't another level perhaps, or where it feels like it might be a little bit too much for them. And James made a really good point right at the beginning of this podcast. We talked about what everyone expected to happen when Jurgen Klopp left Liverpool. And every reasonable analysis quite logically concluded it's going to go flat, because not only has it been an extraordinarily successful period for the club, but they've been pitched at this emotional high for a really long time. And so another voice in the dressing room, whoever it is never going to compare to Klopp and see like, yeah, this is going to be a sixth place, until one day you wake up, you look at the Premier League table and Liverpool is 7 points clear of Arsenal, or 6 points, or whatever it may be. And also that follows the summer, of course, James mentioned this too, where they didn't make substantial transfer moves. They didn't obviously upgrade their side, even in the areas where people thought they needed to. And so it's created a bit of freshness. It's created a lack of pressure. It feels like we've barely spoken about Liverpool. Like even when Liverpool went to the Emirates a couple of weeks ago, it was really, they were propping Arsenal's season in many ways. It's like, yeah, let's see how good Arsenal really are. And Arsenal couldn't beat them. It was actually, I thought, a really, really accomplished performance by Liverpool, and impressive in all sorts of individual ways too. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know how long that lasts for, because beyond a certain point, the conversation around the Premier League is so relentless and so granular, and let's be honest, really tedious in a lot of ways, that I don't think you can fly under the radar for a very long time. It could be as soon as 2 weeks' time we start talking about, well, just how good Liverpool are, so we'll see. But I think there's a sense of a team revived. Like I thought maybe under Klopp, and James will please correct me if I'm wrong, it felt as if the talent was there, but there had been a sort of an emotional sag and everything, because it had gone on for too long. He'd been coached for too long, and there was nothing left. Whereas now they seem reinvigorated by a different set of ideas, a few on-pitch changes. I think one of the players I've enjoyed watching most of the season is Gravenberch, reinvented from the player he was at Arsenal, from the player he was at Ajax, who was much more aggressive, much more sort of, much more inclined to drive forward with the ball. A little bit, similar to the way he was at Bayern Munich, although sparingly, because he barely got a chance there. And his reinvention as this kind of super elegant six is a lot of fun. And I feel like, whereas with some of the themes and the other teams are a little bit tired of them, how good is Jack Grealish? Like, how long is Bernardo Silva going to be at Manchester City? What's the way to stop Erling Haaland? Are Arsenal too dependent on Odegaard or Bukayo Saka, or do they need another midfielder? All these things which have become quite jaded. Liverpool don't really have them. And there's this sort of the coverage of them doesn't feel quite as relentless as it might do for some of those other challenges. And by the way,
I mean,
unimpeded by kind of the need to emotional hedge. Of course, they're in they're a title contender. I know why James can't say that, but of course look at him.
I feel it too, and that's what I said
great.
earlier.
They look great. I don't care.
They
I've got no
do.
horse
They
in that
do.
race.
It's only 10 games.
It's only 10 games,
Listen
but
to him trying to curb expectations.
it's so funny. As we were talking, Seb, James's cat just swanned in just to give us a little show of its tail. I thought it was really sweet. But what do you think of that, James? And I think Seb makes a really good point. New ideas, in particular, for a group of those players who were under Klopp and perhaps felt tired under that coaching. But also, let's not underestimate the willing to impress for a new manager, especially when the team's doing well. Fringe players coming to play and think, do you know what? I could get in on this act as well.
Yeah. I think that is a big part of it because I think no matter how good you are as a manager, there is always that danger that things just go a bit stale. And I think the players have enjoyed, an injection of fresh ideas, a new approach. Someone like Alexander Arnold has spoke very eloquently about just how much he's enjoying the attention to detail. Just how many more meetings they have, how many more one-to-one meetings he has with Slot, drilling down on his defending. And I think his one-to-one defending has improved massively. I think I saw a stat that he made 9 tackles or something against Brighton. He did brilliantly against Matoma, a player who's caused him a lot of problems previously. So I think they have really embraced that. And yes, Slot was fortunate to inherit such a talented group of players because that is very rare, isn't it? Usually when a manager comes in at a club the size of Liverpool, it's because things have gone so badly that there's a big overhaul needed. And they've fallen on hard times. That wasn't the case. Liverpool had just qualified for the Champions League and won the Carabao Cup. But yeah, I think the reason why no one's getting carried away, I think, at the minute is just because I think if you were being ultra critical, which is, to be fair, is what Slot has been like himself, there is still a lot to improve upon. And he made the point after the Brighton game last weekend. He said, if we play like that in the first half in other games, there won't be a way back because you give yourself far too much to do. You can't. It's not sustainable. I think it's important because you showcase your powers in recovery, your resistance, your resilience, and all the rest of it. But there comes a time you have to start games better. And you think the game at Arsenal, yes, it ends up being a really gutsy point, but Liverpool were completely outplayed in the first half. They were outplayed in the first half against Brighton and then pulled it round. So there's been a lot to admire, but also a lot to work on. But in a way, that's exciting, I think, for Liverpool fans because you kind of think, well, if with a bit more time on the training pitch, and if he can get a few players back as well, that is going to bode well. Because the other thing I like about Slot is, I don't think we need to name names, but it does seem like some managers and some clubs play up to the narrative of, we've got an injury crisis and we're without key personnel and the world's against us. But he's just not been like that. No one's really talking about the fact this has been Liverpool over quite a long period without Alisson, arguably the best goalie in world football. Diogo Jota, their first choice, number 9. Of course, Chiesa's not been fit. Harvey Elliott's been out as well. So it's not all been plain sailing. But the way Slot goes about his business is just like, low key, don't moan, don't think about problems, just try and come up with solutions. And at the minute, he keeps on doing that.
Cheers, gents. Thanks so much for your time, James and Seb. We'll be back tomorrow for more. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.